Lights Out, Chapter 31, Part 2. Once all the fires are out and we can be sure of your safety, you will be allowed to return home, the fire department spokesperson said. Gee, Mark thought, how nice of them to allow people to go to their homes. He also wondered about how the radio station was saved, but the announcer addressed that before he signed off. Addressed that before he signed off. Sorry. He explained that since the station was the main emergency broadcast system for this area, they had been placed high on the list of necessary services and had been given a high priority by the fire department. There was no mention of the mayor's request to the governor to bring in National Guard troops. Perhaps, Mark hypothesized, the governor hadn't given him an answer yet. At least there was some good news in the weather. They reported there was a cool front that should push through the area tonight or early in the morning and bring some rain and cooler temperatures. That would hopefully help with the fires in town. People started arriving for the meeting as soon as the news was over. They seemed to be more talkative about the happenings in town than they were yesterday. Mark figured that they were over the shock from the horrific news. He let them visit a little longer than usual before he called the meeting to order. George gave his report first, and Ted gave a report on the Education Committee's progress. They wanted everyone who was interested in having their children enrolled in the community school to come by his house in the morning to sign them up. He also asked anyone who had any textbooks, even old ones, to bring them by. Gunny gave the report that the people who had passed by the gate today, since he'd been there most of the day. After he told about the number of people they had turned away, a woman in the back raised her hand. Do we know who the people we turned away were? What you mean? Gunny asked. Like were any of them doctors or other peoples we could use? Mark had never heard it so quiet at one of the meetings. Gunny finally answered the question. No, ma'am, we only asked them if they knew somebody here. If they didn't, we sent them on their way. I can see now that maybe that wasn't the smartest thing to do. After another long pause, Scott Simmons spoke. I make a motion that we form a committee to interview any people who ask to move in here. Then if the committee feels that they would be an asset to the community, they present their case to the whole group to be voted on. I second it, someone yelled. Okay, all in favor? Mark was interrupted. Where are we going to put the people we let move in here, was John. We could ask for volunteers to let them move in with a family that's not too crowded, or we could put them in a tent in someone's yard or on one of the empty lots. I'm sure if we found a doctor, we could find a place for him to stay, Scott argued with his former friend. Well, I can see where a doctor might be an exception, but we don't need any more people, John spat. What if some solar energy engineer came by and had a truckload of solar panels? Susan asked with the same tone John had used. Well, I think that if anyone is presented to the group for a vote, part of this presentation should be where they are going to live, and I think this is something only the homeowners should vote on. John, we've talked about this before. Mark was trying to keep his voice from revealing how much he wanted to put John in his place. He hoped he was succeeding. Everyone here deserves a say in matters that affect us all. I believe everyone deserves a vote. A few cheers of right on and hell yeah could be heard in the crowd. I do like your idea about having a place for them to live before the committee presents them to us, and I would like to amend it to the motion. Mark hoped that would satisfy John. I'm pleased you like at least one of my ideas, John said sarcastically. But I still say that the homeowner should be making the important decisions. We have more guests here now than we do residents. What if they decide to vote us out of our homes? Do you really think that would happen? Mark answered with a question. Probably not, but it could. Some of the homeowners, mostly those with no guests, nodded their heads in agreement with John. But what's to stop the homeowners from making us do all the work if we're the only ones with votes? Scott's brother-in-law challenged. There were more exclamations from the crowd. Mark could see there was a division forming between the homeowners and newcomers. In fact, it was starting to get ugly. He didn't know what to say to calm the situation down. Mark, I have an idea, Ted said. Yes, Ted, the history professor moved to the front. In the late 18th century, there was a debate much like the one we are having now. The solution they came up with was called the Great Compromise. That's how we ended up with a two-house legislature. We could do the same thing here. Any item that has to be voted on could have to pass both the homeowners vote and the whole group vote. That way the majority couldn't throw the homeowners out of their homes, and the homeowners can't turn the newcomers into slaves. This seemed to satisfy almost everyone. I get by with a little help from my friends, Mark thought. Man, I was just singing that today. It was strange that someone always came up with the right answer. As far as voting, I guess that'll work, John conceded. But I think only the homeowner should be able to make and second motions. John, I don't think that's necessary. If someone makes the motion that the homeowners don't like, they'll vote it down, right? I guess so, but I don't like it, he said as he folded his arms. At the moment, Mark was glad that John had never reproduced. One of him was way more than enough to deal with. A motion was made, seconded, and passed by both groups on Ted's suggestion. Then the same thing happened with the previous motion. Mark asked for suggestions about who should be on the new committee. Lisa and Doc Vasquez were nominated since the main skills needed were medical. Manny was nominated, and Mark thought it was about time his even temperament and wisdom were recognized. Henry Patterson nominated his wife, Mary. He said she'd been in the human resources office at her company and was good at sizing people up. That made 4. Mark knew that committees worked better with an odd number, so there would be no tie votes. When he mentioned this, Ted nominated him. Mark told him it was out of the question, as he was already on the security committee. That's bullshit, Ted blurted. You have no problem with me or Lisa being on 2 committees, and I suspect no one here has a problem with you being on 2 either. You haven't steered us wrong yet. I value your opinion, and I suspect almost everyone here does too. So unless you can come up with a better excuse than that, consider yourself nominated. Okay, I give, Mark answered. They voted on the nominations after they were seconded and accepted them by an overwhelming margin. Gunny was then able to finish his report by asking if anyone knew of a bell they could use to call reinforcements to the command post if necessary. He also mentioned that they could use some way to communicate with the roving guards at night if anyone had any ideas. Since no one had any other business, Mark adjourned the meeting. He called the new committee together and suggested that each one take a 24-hour period to respond to the gate if anyone asked to be admitted. Then if that committee member felt they had skills or anything else that might be useful to the community, they would call the whole community together to talk to that person or persons. This seemed to be a logical procedure to all of them, and they agreed. Mary Patterson agreed to take the first watch. 24-hour period. Mark then headed to a security committee meeting. On the way there, Rodney stopped him. He told Mark he was impressed with the organization they'd built in the subdivision in such a short time. He also wanted to know who the troublemaker was and what his problem was. Mark told the parts man he'd have to fill him in later because he had another meeting to go to. That's what I wanted to talk to you about, the older gentleman asked. If anyone had a bell we could use for an alarm. Have you guys thought about using a car horn? You could tie as many together as necessary to get the volume you want. That's a wonderful idea, Rodney. Thanks. I'll present it to the committee right now. I thought you could use these too. Rodney handed him a plastic Kroger bag. Mark looked into the bag and saw 4 Motorola FRS walkie-talkies. There were also rechargeable batteries and a charger. Mark didn't know what to say. Rodney spoke before he could say thanks. They were in the shop and they all work. I had them in an old metal desk, and I guess that's plus the fact that the building is metal, protected them from the EMP. I really don't have a use for them, and letting you guys use them is the least I can do for y'all letting us stay here. I also want to help out on guard duty if you'll have me. Thanks, Rodney. We would be honored to have your help, and thanks so much for the use of your radios. Mark smiled as he headed over to Gunny's. The members of the security committee all slapped their heads when Mark told them of Rodney's horn idea. Then they were speechless when Mark showed them the radios and batteries. Mark also informed Gunny that Rodney had volunteered to help with security. I'm going to stop right here.